Welcome to Authentic Church. We're so glad you're joining us for this message. We hope it blesses you. Don't forget to hit subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest sermons. Come on, let's get into it.
I want to talk to you today from a passage that it's a story. It's a story about Jesus and his ministry and his interaction with a man that not only changed the interaction of the trajectory of this man's life, but it also changed the trajectory of hundreds and hundreds of people that came into contact with this man. And we pick up this story in the book of Mark chapter 5. And there's this interaction, this moment where Jesus has just healed this man, and I'm going to tell you the story in a moment, but he's healed this man, and then Jesus decides to get back into the boat. They're at the edge of the Sea of Galilee, and it says that Jesus gets back into his boat to leave. And the man who's just been healed by Jesus runs to him, and he says, "Please let me go with you." It says the demon-possessed man, the man who had just been healed of being possessed by demons, runs to Jesus and he says, "Please let me go with you." And Jesus says these really curious words. He's just transformed this man's life and he's just about to pack up and leave. And Jesus says, "No, go home. Go home and tell your family everything that God has done for you and how merciful he has been to you." I wonder if you've had moments in your life where they have so profoundly changed your experience of life that you can never forget them. They're just etched in the back of your mind. But one of the things about those moments is that once you're in it, you can't get out of it. Anybody had one of those moments? Once you're in it, you can't get out of it. I remember I was 8 years old. And Dreamworld announced that they had a brand new roller coaster coming to town, and this was called the Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt was the first upside-down roller coaster in Australia. If you're old enough to remember it, because it no longer exists, it was a double loop. It was a big deal. And I remember going to Dreamworld with my family, and I was so excited to be able to experience the Thunderbolt. And my brother and I ran up to the measuring tape to see if we were tall enough. And I was just tall enough, and my brother was just too short. And so I got to go on the Thunderbolt, and my brother didn't. By the way, you're going to meet my brother next week. We've got Pastor Sanjay coming as a special guest next week. He'll be doing our morning and our night service. So put that in your calendar. It's going to be a terrific, terrific week. We've had our niece with us all week, Madison, and it's been lovely seeing her. They've just moved back from Hong Kong. But here am I. I'm allowed to go on the roller coaster. My brother is not. So it was agreed that my mum would stay with my brother and my dad put me on the roller coaster. And I got into the roller coaster and they strapped me in and they bring that big bar down and then it locked into place. And then all of a sudden I realized I can't get out. And panic set in because I really didn't know what to expect. I was one part excited and one part terrified as I looked up the coaster and I saw the big steep climb that it was going to make. And as it started to click up that first hill, you know the one, where they deliberately make it loud and terrifying. And every click is one more fear that rises up inside of you, and I began to cry in fear. I said, "Dad, I want to get off." And Dad said, "Sorry, son, you're locked in. There's no getting." I said, "No, please, Dad, I've changed my mind. I don't want to do this anymore." And he said, "Sorry, son, there's no getting off." My dad was trying to calm me down, and he said, "Oh, look over there. There's Uncle John's place." Uncle John lived in Upper Coomera, and so he was trying to point out. He said, "Look, there's Uncle John's place." I said, "I'm not looking. I'm too scared." And he said, "It's going to be all right." And I said, "No, we're going to die." And as we clicked up this hill, I was screaming in terror. And then, that feeling as you crest the top of a roller coaster and then all of a sudden the floor drops out from under you and your stomach goes up into your throat. And then all of a sudden my terror turned to exhilaration. My fear turned into excitement. As we went through the 2 loops, it was over in a matter of seconds. And I heard myself screaming as we braked into the loading zone again. And I said, that was awesome. Let's do it again. I don't know if you've ever had that experience in your walk with God. But I have found that following Jesus is a little bit like riding a roller coaster. If you're really locked in, if you're really committed to following Jesus, you've got to understand one thing. You're not getting out of it. You're in. You're in for. I want to speak to these young people that are getting baptized today. I want to make sure that you understand clearly what you're doing. What you are doing today is you are saying to everybody that's here, I'm following Jesus and I'm locked in and I'm not going back. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? When you decide to follow Jesus for real, and I say for real because we're all on a journey and some of us are just dipping our toe in the water. Some of us are just standing on the side watching the roller coaster and saying, that looks fun. But some of us have locked in. And some of us have said, I'm all in and there's no turning back. Is anybody all in? Anybody all in? The problem with being all in with Jesus, he's going to take you to places that you may not want to go. He's going to leave you in places that you never expected. And he's going to ask you to do things that you never thought you'd be able to do. Hello, Gene and Regan know all about this right now. So there's a little bit of a backstory to this man. See, Jesus has just crossed the lake. It's the Sea of Galilee. It's actually a lake. And he's crossed from the Jewish side to the non-Jewish side. See, Jesus did most of his ministry on the Jewish side of the lake, which was the western side of the lake. But one day, for no apparent reason, Jesus says to his disciples, get in the boat, we're going to the other side. Seems like a reasonable request, except that what you don't understand is good Jewish boys don't go to the other side of the lake. The other side of the lake is a collection of towns, 10 towns in fact, and they were collectively known as the Decapolis. The Decapolis was the Roman side of the lake. The Decapolis was the non-Jewish side of the lake. The Decapolis was where all those people that didn't follow God lived. The Decapolis was the place where it was said was evil. The Decapolis was the place that mums warned their little boys about, don't ever go over to the other side of the lake. Those people over there, you don't know what they get up to. Anybody had that told by their parents? Don't go to that part of town. You don't know those people. Those people are bad people. And so this is the Decapolis is the place where good Jewish boys don't go. And here's Jesus the rabbi, the Jewish rabbi, asking his 12 little proteges, good Jewish boys raised to do what the Bible tells them to do. And here they are sitting in a boat going to the other side of the lake. And I can imagine their fear and excitement all in one. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe we're going to the Decapolis. Have you been to the Decapolis? Oh, I went once. I snuck out when I was in high school. Mum still doesn't know I went there. Oh, I've never been. What do they like? What do they do over there? Oh, you wouldn't believe it. Those people, the way they dress over there. Oh, my gosh. And so here you've got these 3 young men who are being taken by their teacher over to this bad part of town. And on the way, as if it wasn't scary enough that you're going to the place where your mum and dad told you should never go, on the way there's a storm. And the storm is so big that these disciples, who are actually fishermen and they know all about storms, they become so scared that they say to Jesus, Jesus, we're going to die. Funny thing about this story is this: for good Jewish boys, they read the world in terms of what was going right and what was going wrong had a lot to do with whether Jesus was happy with, God was happy with you or not happy with you. And so if they're in the middle of a storm, going to a place that they were told they should never go, and then they feel like that storm is so bad that they're going to die, in their heads they're thinking, God's angry with us. This was a bad idea. Jesus, what are you doing to us? And so somebody goes looking for Jesus, and where do they find him? They find him sleeping in the back of the boat. Has anybody ever felt like your life is going to sink and you go looking for Jesus and he's asleep in the back of your boat? It's like, come on, Jesus, we're going to die here. And Jesus' response is, relax. Word of advice for young men. Never tell your wife to relax. All right? Apparently, Jesus didn't get this advice. He told his disciples to relax. And then he told the waves to calm down. And the disciples are just like, who is this guy? Not only does he take us to the bad part of town, but he speaks to the waves and the wind and it obeys them. You've got to understand that when you choose to follow Jesus, you're not just following a man, you're following God himself, who can command the wind and the waves of your life to be silent. But you've got to understand that in order to experience the miracle of Jesus calming the storm, you've got to be willing to enter the storm with Jesus first. Oh, hello. You know, a lot of us like to see the miracles, but we don't like the storm that comes with the miracles. Hello. A lot of us want to see the hand of God, but we just don't want to put ourselves in a position where we actually need the hand of God in our life. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? We like our lives to be controlled, to be a little bit sterile, to be a little bit predictable. When things start happening that you don't expect, you get a little bit nervous. But here Jesus is teaching his disciples, if you want to follow me, you've got to be prepared to follow me into places you've never been. You've got to be prepared to follow me into places that maybe nobody else would advise you to go. But if you know that I've called you, you've got to know that I'm in the boat with you. I'm in the boat with you, and if the storm comes, I'm not going to make you avoid the storm. We're going to go through the storm, but you've got to understand that I command the storm. The storm obeys me, and so you don't have to be fearful. You just have to trust me. So Jesus gets to the other side of the lake with his disciples, and it says that he steps off the boat. Let's pick up the story in Mark chapter 5, verse 1 to 5. And it says, they arrived on the other side of the lake in the region of the Gennesaret, or the Gerasenes, all right? And this is one of the towns in the Decapolis. And Jesus climbed out of the boat, and a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from a cemetery to meet him. How many people know if you got in a boat with Jesus to go to a place where you were told you should never go, you've encountered a storm, and then the first person that comes out to meet you on the other side is a man who's possessed by the devil who lives in the cemetery, you know things are not going so well. So the disciples are cowering in the back. And it says that this man lived amongst the burial caves, but he could not be restrained even with chains. Whenever he was put into chains, he would break them from his wrist. He would smash the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered amongst the burial caves in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. How many people know this man's not very happy? He's having a hard time of it. He's having the worst time of it. Clearly, his life has not gone the way his parents hoped it would go. He's in a mess. He's bound up. And there's nothing anybody can do to save him. And the first thing I want you to take note of this is that it doesn't matter how deep you've gone. It doesn't matter how far you've gone. You've got to understand Jesus is prepared to go into the darkest places to find you. There is no place that Jesus won't go to find you. That's the extent of his love. You know, there's a Psalm 109 that says, where can I go to escape your presence? Even if I make my bed in hell, you'll find me. You got to know that if you made your bed in hell, Jesus is looking for you. You're not escaping his love. His love goes that far. And so here's Jesus has crossed to the other side of the lake, done something that nobody else would do. Why? Because there's one man that he wants to save. This man that nobody else can help. And the story goes on that this man, when Jesus was a far distance away, he ran to meet him and he bowed low before him. What a curious response. Here's a man who's possessed by the devil, He's obviously not in his right mind. He has to be chained up. He howls and shrieks like an animal. He cuts himself. But the minute he sees Jesus, his first reaction is to run to Jesus and bow to Jesus. And as he bows to Jesus, it says that with a shriek he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, do not torture me." You know what this passage says to me? There are voices in our life that don't want us to be anywhere near Jesus. Here is a man that is so tortured by the voices in his head, so tortured by the demonic powers in his life, that as soon as they detect Jesus, they are screaming, "Stay away from us. Don't come near us. We can't bear to be in you." You see, you've got to understand that the devil knows who Jesus is. The devil knows the power of Jesus, and the devil will do anything he can to keep you out of the presence of God. You know, I remember having a chat with a young person one day. They went to a conference and they got transformed, and they felt like God was telling them, "When you get back, I want you to go to Bible college." And they were excited and they were enthusiastic. And the minute they got back to the church that we were at, all of a sudden, life started to go sideways. All of these objections, all of these obstacles started coming up, where they started to say, "Yeah, I don't know if I actually heard from Jesus. I don't know if this Bible college stuff is really me. I don't know if I'm going to, And I had a chat with her, and I remember saying to her, I said, "Be careful." I said, "Because when you make a decision to go after God, the devil's going to do everything he can to distract you. The devil's going to do everything he can to say, 'Hey, this is not the path for you.' The devil's going to do everything he can to try and stop you from getting into the presence of Jesus." Because why? Because like the song we just sang, if you can just get in the presence of Jesus, he can transform everything. There are some things in your life that can't be fixed by human intervention. There are some things in all of our life that need a touch from Jesus. We need Jesus to put his heavenly hand inside of our lives and say, "Be healed and be set free." And too often what happens is when we find ourselves at these moments of pivot, when we find ourselves at these moments where we need to bring change into our life, and we know that we need Jesus in that area of our life, and then that voice comes into our head and says, "No, you don't. You need to stay away. That's not so good for you." And you start to second guess yourself. I love the response of this man, because what it does was this: he understood that the voices were not him. See, the voices shrieking at Jesus were not this man. They were the voices of the demonic spirits inside of him. The demonic spirits didn't want to be about Jesus, but what did the man do? He said, despite the shrieking that was coming out of his mouth, he ran to Jesus and he bowed low before Jesus. You got to understand that even if the voices are telling you don't go to Jesus, you can still choose to run to Jesus every single time. The choice still remains. There are too many people that are telling us today that just because you feel it, you've got to do it. I want to tell you right now, your feelings don't make your decisions. Your feelings are just feelings. But the choices you make after you feel will determine the path that you end up on. We've got a whole world out there that is making choices and determining the future of their life based on a bunch of feelings. I feel this way, therefore I am. This is who I am because that's how I feel. You know, once I felt like I was meant to be a pilot. I'm not. Once I felt I could take Tavita in a wrestling match. I can't. I've even tried to eat as much as Tavita eats. I still can't beat him. See, your feelings are just an emotion in a moment. Your feelings don't determine outcomes. Choices determine outcomes. And you could choose to bow at the feet of Jesus, even if your feelings are telling you something else. Even if the voices that we all listen to voices in our head, all right? You're not crazy if you've got voices in your head. You're just a human being. Right? We've all got negative voices in our head telling us to do all sorts of things with our life. We can choose to get into the presence of God even when the things in our life or the voices in our life are telling us otherwise. But the choice remains ours. What you've got to understand is this: transformation is preceded by surrender. Let me say that in another way. God can't transform the darkest parts of your life until you're willing to give the darkest parts of your life to Jesus. Hello. God can't do anything in your life unless you're prepared to, like this man, go running to Jesus and bow down at his feet and say, Jesus, you do what you've got to do. Too many of us are saying, Jesus, fix me, but we're not prepared to surrender to Jesus. Oh, fix me, but don't fix that part. I'm not ready for that. Oh, Jesus, I need your intervention when things are going wrong. And as soon as things are going right, okay, thanks, Jesus, I'll see you in another 6 months. Because we think we've got our lives together. We think we can pull it all together all by ourselves. And then Jesus is like this magic genie who we rub the lamp and we get him out every time life goes wrong. But what Jesus wants to be a part of every minute of your life. Every minute of your life, Jesus says, you need to pick up your cross and follow me. Pick up your cross means you've got to die to yourself. You've got to surrender. You've got to be willing to say, Jesus, I can't do this without you. And here is this demoniac man, this man possessed by the spirit of the devil, and he's broken and he's messed up, and he understands that despite the feelings and despite the voices, I know that if I can just run to Jesus and I can just bow before him, that he can do something in my life that nobody else has been able to do. You've got to understand that when nobody else can help you, Jesus can. Jesus can transform your life in an instant if you'll just be willing to surrender to him. And we've all got areas that we need to surrender to Jesus. And so the story goes on, and I won't go into too much detail about this part of the story that, Jesus tells the demons to come out of Jesus, and the demons talk to Jesus and say, Jesus, at least give us somewhere to go. We've got no home. If we leave this guy, we've got to go somewhere. And Jesus says, sees those pigs over there? You can go inside the pigs. But he tricked them because he didn't tell the demons that when they possess the pigs get scared. And then the pigs ran off the cliff. And they drowned themselves in the ocean. And nobody ate bacon that week. Well, look, nobody was eating bacon because they were good Jewish boys. But I don't want to focus on that part of the story, okay? You can read that part of the story for yourself, where Jesus tells the demons they can go into the pigs and the pigs go off the end. That's not really, I don't think, the really important part of the story. After this happens, it says the man who was possessed by the demons was sitting in his right mind. Jesus set him free, and he was sitting in his right mind. And it says in Mark 5:15-17, it says, the crowd gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by a legion of demons. And he was sitting there fully clothed, perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. How many people know that you can change something in your life, and there's a whole bunch of people in your life that would rather you stay crazy because it makes them feel comfortable? Hello. You can change your life and put yourself on the right track. You can get rid of all your bad habits, and then all of a sudden, all of those people that supposedly care for you start saying stupid things like, I liked you better when you were that. Isn't that weird how we do that? We do that to people who try and clean their life up, who try and get their life right with God, who try and live a path that is better for them. And then all these people start saying, I liked you better when you were out partying every weekend. I liked you better when you were, getting into fights all the time. I liked you better when you were obnoxious and, hard to be around. Isn't it weird how humans do that? You know what I've found is that when God transforms your life, it becomes an affront to people who are not ready to change. See, when your life changes, it actually puts a mirror in front of everybody else, and everybody else is suddenly confronted with the lack of change in their own life. They start looking at their life, and they look at your life, and they say, wow, you've changed, but I haven't. And I don't like how that makes me feel. So I would much prefer you don't change, then I don't have to deal with the stuff I know that I have to deal with. Hello? You know, you can change for the better and people around you will still say it's a bad idea. People will still be afraid of you. People will still question why you're doing that Jesus stuff. Why you're going to church all the time. Why you're hanging out with that connect group during the week. Why do you go to prayer meeting on a Tuesday morning at 6:30? That seems a little bit extreme. It is. But here's the thing. What they're actually saying is, I'm afraid because I can now see that I need to change, but I'm not ready to change yet. And so you don't have to let the opinions of other people, as God begins to transform your life, as Jesus starts to change your life, you don't have to be afraid of the opinions of other people who say this doesn't look like a good idea for you. Why? Because what they're actually saying is, I'm not ready to change. And that's okay. If they're not ready to change, just keep loving them and keep praying for them. But don't let them pull you away from what God is doing in your life. Come on, somebody. Too many times I've met Christians who God has done something miraculous in their life, then they've faced the opposition of their family or their friends, and they've decided that it's just too hard. I can't do this anymore. I remember sitting with a couple one day. They'd been away from church for decades, and they came back to church because one of their family members died. And they thought, all of us as funerals do, they start thinking about death, and they said, oh, maybe I've got to get my life right with God. And so they come to church on the Sunday. And God encounters them and changes their life. And the next Sunday we happened to be getting baptized, and they got baptized. And they said to us, Pastor, we're so glad we're back in church. We've so missed church. We've so missed being in the presence of God. Oh, we're so excited. I said, I'm excited for you too. Next week we're presenting the certificates. Will you come back next week and we'll present the baptism certificate to you? And they never came. And then the week after that, they never came. And we called them and they never answered. And we sent them a text message and they never came back. Do you know the most common time that people stop coming to church is straight after they get baptized? I've seen this over and over and over and over and over again. Because as soon as you say, Jesus, I'm locked in, the devil goes on ultra mode and he says, I'm going to do everything I can to discourage this person and get them to change their mind. I want to speak to you young people, this coming week and couple of weeks, you're going to have experiences where you start to wonder if you made the right decision. And I want you to understand and I want you to know that when you lock in with Jesus, the storms won't go away, but if you can go through the storm with Jesus, when you come out the other side, it's going to become like coming off a roller coaster. My gosh, that was the most terrifying experience of my life, but I'm so glad I did it. Let's do it again. Come on, somebody. You know, I met this couple almost a year later. I was at another funeral and they happened to be there. And I said, where have you been? And they said, you know what, Pastor? The minute we got baptized, the enemy started attacking us. So all this negativity, all this frustration for our family, all this stuff started to happen. And so we thought to ourselves, it might be better if we just don't do this Jesus stuff. Then the devil won't attack us so much. Hello. That's exactly what the devil wants you to believe. He wants to discourage you. He wants you to stay out of the presence of God because he knows that when you're in the presence of God, your life changes. Things that nobody else can fix will get changed. But you've got to stay in the boat even when there's a storm. You've got to stay in the presence of God even when there's people saying you shouldn't be doing this. Anyway, I got off track and these people, they're afraid and they see this man and he's sitting there sane. And then those who had seen what happened told other people about the demon-possessed man and the pigs, and the crowd began to plead with Jesus to go away. What a weird response. You got a maniac living in your community who needs to be chained up, who howls at night, who's cutting himself, who's obviously messed up beyond belief, and then when he finally gets the help he needs and he's sane and he's clothed and in his right mind, everybody says, Jesus, you need to get out of here. This is too messed up for us. We live in a world that does not want to see you sane and in your right mind. We live in a world that does not want to see you set free from your addictions, that does not want to see you set free from your bondages. And you are going to be surrounded by people that will say, Jesus, go away. I don't like how this makes me feel. But you've got to understand that when you lock in with Jesus, when you say, I'm going to follow you, yeah, he's going to transform your life, but you've got to stay strapped in. You've got to stay strapped in. I remember the day that I realized I was going to become a pastor. See, you've got to understand something about your pastor. I never set out to be a pastor. I was trying to avoid being a pastor. I was working really hard not to be a pastor. I was going to be a rock star. You know, and I was becoming a minor Christian celebrity with my guitar. I thought I was all that in a bag of chips. And then one day I'm in Israel, as you do. And I happened to be at the Sea of Galilee, where this story is set. And I happened to be on a boat that was going from the west side of the lake to the Decapolis. And I'm standing on the front of the boat, and it was pouring with rain, and I wouldn't go into the shelter because my life was going sideways and I didn't know how to fix it. Because what I could see is this: I could see all my hopes and dreams of being a musician and a songwriter fading away. And all of this call of God to be a pastor and to pastor other people and love other people rushing towards me, and I didn't want a bar of it. And I stood there on the boat in the rain, heading to the Decapolis. And I said, God, I don't want to do this. And he said, if you'll trust me, you'll look back on this moment and you'll be glad you chose to trust me. I can honestly say, my niece asked me this week, she said, Uncle, do you sing anymore? And the truth of the matter is, I don't sing very much. I don't pick up my guitar. My kids are glad about that. Thank you, son. The thing is this: it was heartbreaking to give up my passion, my dreams, the things that I was living for. But I can honestly say now, when I'm 10 years on the other side of that moment, I look back on that moment and I say, I'm so glad I chose to follow Jesus. I'm so glad that I chose to let him steer my roller coaster. And it's still a roller coaster, but I'm strapped in and I can't get off. And sometimes I wish I could, but there's no emergency stop. I keep hitting it, but the coaster won't stop because Jesus is driving my roller coaster, not me. And I want to encourage you, as if you find yourself in this place. Some of you are just starting out on the journey. Some of you are in a place where Jesus is saying, hey, you need to surrender your life to me. I can transform your life, but I can only transform it if you're willing to surrender. Some of you have surrendered your life to Jesus and you're now confronted by the voices of other people who are saying, this is a bad idea, you need to give up now. Some of you have locked in and you're in the ride of your life and you're wondering when it's going to end and if you'll survive. But here's the cool thing about this story. Can we just hold up on the sanding for now? Thanks, mate. Here's the thing about this story. Jesus says to the Decapolis man, stay here. Tell everybody what I've done. And then he leaves. And we never hear about this man ever again. And as I was reading this story, I asked myself the question, whatever did happen to that guy? Whatever happened to the guy that got left behind or seemed to be left behind? And there's this little reference in Mark 7:31, a couple of chapters later, where Jesus goes away from the Decapolis and he goes and preaches back on the west side and he's talking to all the Jewish people again. And then it says in Mark 7:31 that Jesus again returned to the region of the Decapolis. And then it tells a story about Jesus returning to the Decapolis and him being greeted by thousands of men, women, and children who were all saying, Jesus, can you heal me? Can you set me free? Can you do what you did in that man's life. They didn't actually say those words, but it actually says in Matthew 15, Jesus returned to the Sea of Galilee. He climbed a hill and he sat down, and a vast crowd brought to him all those who were lame, blind, crippled, and couldn't speak, and many others, and they laid them before Jesus, and he healed them all. And the crowd was amazed. And those who hadn't been able to speak were talking, and the crippled were made well, and the lame were walking, and the blind could see, and they praised the God of Israel. What you've got to understand is this crowd was in the Decapolis. A few months earlier, they were telling Jesus to get lost. And then one man stayed. One man locked in for the ride of his life. One man said, I can't stop talking about what Jesus has done in me, and I'm going to tell everybody that will listen. And a couple of months later, Jesus comes back, and thousands of people are clamoring to meet Jesus. What you've got to understand is that your one story of Jesus transforming your life and you locking into what he wants to do in your life can transform thousands. You've got to understand, maybe you're stuck in a family where you're asking Jesus, please get me out of this family. Maybe you're stuck in a school that you don't like and you don't have any friends, and you're saying, Jesus, why am I here? Maybe you're asking, Jesus, why am I in this job? Why do I work in this place? Why do I live in this city? Why is all this stuff happening to me? I want you to say, if Jesus has transformed your life, he has transformed your life for one reason, and that is to tell everybody what Jesus has done so that they can meet Jesus too. Jesus sat the crowd down. And he felt compassion for them because he said they'd been listening to him for 3 days and they must be hungry. How many people know that if you've been listening to a preacher for 3 days, you're going to get hungry? How many people are glad that your pastor doesn't preach for 3 days? And Jesus fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves of bread and a couple of fishes. Now, you've all heard of the story of feeding the 5,000, haven't you? That, in fact, happened on the Jewish side of the lake. There was 2 crowds that got fed. There was a Jewish crowd and there was a non-Jewish crowd. There was the good side of the lake and there was the not good side of the lake. Jesus is no respecter of where you come from. He'll feed you if you come to him. Jesus will set you free if you come to him. And what Jesus was demonstrating to his disciples is this: I'm here for everybody. I'm not here just for the good Jewish boys. I'm here for the bad Decapolis boys as well. I'm here for the Gentiles. I'm here for the Australians and for the Kiwis and for the Ukrainians and for the Albanians and for the Indians and even the Brits. I love you guys. Jesus is no respecter of your culture. He can set you free, but you've got to be willing to be submitted to the work that he's doing in your life so that he can set you free. Can anybody say amen to this?
Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you were blessed by this sermon. If you got something out of it, don't forget to give us a thumbs up or share it with a friend, and make sure you hit subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest messages. To give to the work of Authentic Church or to learn more about getting connected, you can follow the links in our description. See you next time.